Okay, I think we will begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Brock, and I'm the director of the Community College Research Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce this webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on community college transfer. Today's webinar is actually the first in what will be a series of sessions hosted by the Accelerating Recovery in Community College, or ARC Research Network, which is a network funded by the Institute of Education Sciences in Washington, D.C. Some of you may be asking, what exactly is the ARC network? Well, I will tell you briefly that the ARC network is a group of many researchers working in coordination all around the country who are gathering data and evaluating strategies that states and community colleges are putting into place to help community college students recover from the pandemic. The pandemic introduced a whole host of challenges for community colleges, as I probably don't need to tell any of you watching this webinar today. There were sharp enrollment declines, particularly for students of color. There were issues related to learning loss. And there was, of course, a psychological or emotional impact of the pandemic. Our goal as a research network is to be able to document some of the issues, trends, and challenges that community colleges and their students are facing, to evaluate responses that states and colleges are putting into place to try to address some of those problems or issues, and then to deliver timely information to the field that will help guide recovery efforts. So today's webinar homes in on a key function of community colleges, which is transfer. As probably most of you know, many students enter community college with the goal of going on to a four-year college or university, ultimately to earn a bachelor's degree. We know that transfer patterns shifted over the course of the pandemic, but the purpose of this webinar today is to look more deeply at how those transfer patterns may have shifted, to look at for whom the pattern shifted, which students were most affected, in other words. And most important, what are the implications of some of these shifts for policy and for practice? Here to answer those questions for you today are researchers from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, who really have an extraordinary ability to link enrollment data from colleges and universities all around the country. Doug Shapiro, who is the director of the Research Center, unfortunately is in transit and was not able to make this call at the last minute. So our presentation today will begin with Jeremy Cohen, a research associate at the center, who will kick off our presentation. So Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I am Jeremy Cohen, as Tom mentioned, and we will be joined later on in this presentation by Hee-Sun Kim, Senior Research Associate at the Research Center. Our topic for today, pandemic impact on community college students and their pathways to a baccalaureate, and we'll be looking at the latest trends and updates for fall 2022. So I'm going to give a little bit of a roadmap of where our presentation will be going today. And the presentation of the latest data is divided into two sections. First, we'll be looking at transfer enrollment during the pandemic. And in this section, we'll be tracking fall-to-fall changes in the number of students who transferred into a new institution, starting with transfer overall, and then drilling down to highlight how upward transfer from community colleges to four-year institutions was affected. We'll take a look at which student populations were most affected by pandemic-driven changes in upward transfer, by student demographics, by student income background using a new experimental analysis that we released with this transfer in progress report, and by differences in upward transfer during the pandemic by community college characteristics. This will allow us to gain a better understanding of how the upward transfer pathway has contracted during the pandemic in terms of changes in the number of students starting this pathway in each term. It does not allow us to follow the same students over time. So in section 2, we'll switch focus to follow cohorts of community college entering students over time and ask how the pandemic has influenced post-transfer outcomes. We'll be looking at the entering community college cohorts of fall 2014, 2015, and 2016, each of whom were impacted by the pandemic toward the end of the 6-year window in which we're looking at outcomes. Switching to look at this cohort-based analysis will allow us to follow the same students over time and get some insights into how the pandemic has started to affect success and progress. We'll look at the implications for community colleges, and we'll hopefully have time for a demonstration of our data dashboard so that you can learn how to look through the longitudinal trends yourself. How did transfer opportunities and pathways shift during the pandemic? I'll take just a brief step back to look at community college enrollment changes over the pandemic. It will probably be no surprise to anyone on this call that community colleges here the line in orange, were the sector hit hardest by the pandemic. National community college enrollment fell nearly 10%, 9.6% in fall 2020, followed by another large decline in fall 2021. Those declines began to stabilize in fall 2022 when community college enrollment was flat and national undergraduate enrollment declined only 0.6%. However, by fall 2022, there were still about 1 million fewer community college students than there had been in fall 2019. In contrast, public four-year undergraduate enrollment, here the green line, declined by no more than 2% nationally in any of the fall terms since the pandemic. This community college enrollment stabilization, which we first saw in fall 2022, has continued into spring 2023, when enrollment was flat again compared to the previous spring. And I think it's important to note, and we'll come back to some of these themes throughout the presentation, some of the drivers of this overall community college enrollment stabilization. These have principally been the return of freshmen to community colleges, large increases in the number of dual enrolled high school students, and the fact that enrollment in skilled trade programs tended to grow over the pandemic, even as enrollment in more academic majors tended to witness larger enrollment declines. So turning now to transfer, just again recall that in this part of the webinar, we're looking at data about enrollment in each semester rather than following the same students over time. So transfer students will only be counted in transfer enrollment in the fall in which they transferred. And we can see that even as undergraduate enrollment has stabilized, transfer enrollment continues to decline. In the fall of 2022, transfer enrollment declined an additional 2.3%, although this was about half the rate of the decline in fall 2021. This transfer enrollment decline has exceeded the non-transfer enrollment decline throughout the pandemic. So these are students who have returned to the same institution. And again, the numbers we're providing here are about transfer enrollment across higher education without respect to transfer pathway or the origins and destinations of transfer students. I will take just a minute to look at this returning transfer bar, which you can see grew in the fall of 2020. This is the first time we're seeing that since the pandemic. These are students who are returning to a new institution after stop out. However, these represent a minority of transfer students, about 43%, and an even smaller share of upward transfer students, about a third. The fact that the largest share of these students were enrolled at community colleges in fall 2022 also suggests that they are mostly lateral two-year transfers, moving from community college to community college with a stop out in between. So I'm going to now turn and look at transfer pathways in particular so that we can drill down into upward transfer and how the pandemic has affected movement of community college students toward baccalaureate degrees. So upward transfer is the first line here, and you can see that from fall 2020 to fall 2022, enrollment of upward transfer students declined by nearly 15%, falling 7.5% each year. Throughout this section, you will often hear me contrast upward transfer enrollment trends with lateral two-year trends, which reflect those students transferring between community colleges. In contrast to the upward transfer pathway, as you can see, the lateral transfer pathway has fared better, declining only about 1.1% and returning to stability in fall 2022. These lateral students moving between community colleges could be students looking for the best short-term credentials in a hot labor market, or students trying to find a better program to prepare them for upward transfer. Given the overall growth in skill programs compared to most academic ones, as well as an increasing share of men in the community college to community college transfer pathway over this period, and men tend to be overrepresented in those skilled trade programs, we suspect that this is more about program fit for these the short-term labor market credential, rather than it is about moving for upward transfer. But there is, we don't have too much of a way to tease that out, and there is likely some of that happening as well. So this does suggest to us somewhat of a turning away during the pandemic of community college students from baccalaureate-oriented pathways. Among those students who did transfer to four-year institutions from community colleges, declines were particularly large at the most selective institutions. So their access to these institutions appears to be shrinking. At public and private nonprofit four-year institutions, which is what is captured here at the in this slide, you can see that the upward transfer into highly selective and very competitive institutions both declined by about a fifth between fall 2020 and fall 2022. These are much smaller than the declines for students transferring to these institutions from other four-year colleges. Those students, their enrollment at very competitive college, those transfer students from other four-year colleges actually increased slightly in fall 2022, as you can see. Some of this could be explained by differences in just the overall enrollment declines at four-year schools versus two-year schools. But given that there were declines throughout and we're seeing some growth for students transferring from four-year colleges, it seems that they're retaining access in certain ways that community college students are not to this second most competitive tier. So considering these large transfer declines, we'll turn now to look at disparities in upward transfer patterns over the pandemic, looking particularly at student demographics, community college characteristics, and student income background. So turning first to age, upward transfer grew only for the youngest students in fall 2022, those who were age 20 or younger. These younger students were the least affected upward transfer students during the pandemic in terms of enrollment. There were also large gains among the same age group for transfer between community colleges. That enrollment along that pathway grew 17%. For students under 20 in comparison to the 5.9% for students 20 and younger in the upward transfer pathway. Students 20 and younger now represent fully fully a quarter up from a fifth of lateral transfer enrollment as of fall 2022. Turning to gender. So we are seeing here in upward transfer enrollment a pattern that has become familiar to us at the Clearinghouse now in the overall enrollment numbers since the fall of 2021, which are enrollment declines among women starting to exceed those among men. And we see this again in the overall enrollment data as well. It may be due to a number of factors, including women seeking greater flexibility around integrating caregiving and education during the pandemic. We have seen women's enrollment increase notably at primarily online institutions. In terms of transfer specifically, the data show declines in both men and women taking the upward transfer path. Again, decline among women students is much higher. In contrast, transfer between community colleges is growing among men, with lateral two-year enrollment rising 5% for men between fall 2020 and fall 2022, and falling 5% for women. So men have increased their share of both upward transfer and lateral transfer from community college, but this is driven, in the case of upward transfer, more by declines among women, whereas growth in men traversing the community college to community college pathway is primarily driving that trend. You'll see here on this slide, looking at differences in upward transfer enrollment by race and ethnicity, that in the period from fall 2020 to fall 2022, we saw large declines in upward transfer enrollment across all race and ethnicity groups, or at least the ones charted here. You will, however, notice that there were differences in patterns in the enrollment change moving from fall 2021 to fall 2022. So for white, Latinx, and Asian students, the rate of decline for upward transfer enrollment was stable moving into fall 2022. In the case of Latinx students, or increased in the case of white and Asian students. But the upward transfer enrollment decline slowed for Black and Native American students in fall 2022. If we compare that to lateral transfer to another community college, that grew notably among Black and Latinx students between 2020 and 2022, even as upward transfer declined. Which may again suggest interest in efficiently acquiring credentials in a hot labor market or improving program fit among students from these backgrounds, at least over the time period that we're investigating here. Turning now to community college characteristics, and we'll first look at the urbanicity of the community college campus environment. And you'll see that declines in upward transfer enrollment from community colleges located in urban and suburban areas have only accelerated since the start of the pandemic, even as overall transfer enrollment along all transfer pathways has started to decline at a slower rate in fall 2022. In contrast, upward transfer from rural and town community colleges began to grow slightly in fall 2022 after exhibiting some of the largest declines the previous fall term. These patterns suggest to us that, at least in the near term, bachelor's degrees may be increasingly out of reach for community college students enrolled in urban and suburban settings. And we also looked in our report at differences in enrollment patterns by the program focus of different community colleges. And you can see here that community colleges with a high transfer program focus had their sharpest decline in upward transfer enrollment in fall 2022, falling by over 11%. Again, these declines have been accelerating rather than improving. You may also notice that in fall 2022, there was slight growth of upward transfer from community colleges with a high vocational focus. This is certainly interesting given what has been happening with enrollment in skilled trade programs and focus on vocational programs. I would emphasize, however, that these institutions continue to account for a relatively small share of all upward transfer enrollment, about 16%. In contrast, transfer between community colleges increased or was stable, regardless of the program mix at the Origin Community College in fall 2022. And finally, I'm going to turn to look at how access to upward transfer was differentially affected students across the income distribution. So if you look here, again, looking at the long-term pattern, here we're charting 2019 to 2022, you'll see that the declines pre-pandemic to 2022 were large across all income groups for upward transfer, which is the top panel here. But the patterns again shifted. So earlier in the pandemic, the declines were much larger for lower income students. And in the most recent fall term, 2022, the declines were largest at the top and decreased as students' household income decreased. And finally, you'll recall from earlier that access to the most selective institutions for students transferring from community colleges has been declining. And even as that has been declining, what we're seeing is that the students who dominate that pathway are the wealthiest students to begin with. This here represents the share of students along each pathway in 2021 and 2022 enrolled by institutional selectivity. And you can see that even though the share of students from the top 20% of the US household income distribution dipped slightly, they still account for nearly half of all students enrolled who traverse this upward transfer pathway in 2022. Just one note about this income measure: it is our first application of a measure under development and generously supported by Ascendium Education Group. Very briefly, it links students' first addresses in Clearinghouse enrollment data to US Census Bureau data at the census tract level to estimate students' socioeconomic backgrounds. And I'm happy to address additional questions about the measure in Q&A. But now I'll turn it over to Hisan to lead us into the second part.
Thank you, Jeremy. So far, the trends that we have presented are based on the latest transfer enrollment trends at the most aggregate level. The findings that I'm going to talk about now for the next couple of slides is looking at a slightly different student population, a more focused look at beginning community college students and following them over years to track their progress and success and to seek answers to community college, how the pandemic has influenced their post-transfer outcomes. So to do this, we went a few years back to follow 6 cohorts of community college students, 3 starting in the pre-pandemic fall terms of 2014, 15, and 16, and 3 who started during the pandemic years of 2019, 20, and 21. So for the earlier cohorts, we were able to track them for 6 years. For the more recent cohorts, we'll be able to see how the pandemic might have influenced their earlier years of post-secondary careers. So we look at the share of beginning community college students who transfer to a 4-year institution, which is the transfer out rate, as well as the percentage of those who completed their degrees. Next slide, please. So just by looking at the size of the community college beginning cohorts, we see that the pre-pandemic beginning cohorts was consistently around 1 million students until we see the pandemic impacted 2020 cohort, which decreased in size about 17% compared to the 2019 cohort, which represents about a decrease in 167,000 students. But the good news is that students who transfer out of their starting community college to 4-year institutions as a share of the entire community college beginning cohort was not as impacted much by the pandemic, but it actually remained relatively stable across cohorts. It's also notable that for the 2014, 15, and 16 cohorts who we were able to track for 6 years, the percentage of upward transfer students earning bachelor's degrees in 6 years actually went up from 55% to 58%. Next slide, please. So here in this graph, the percents in red boxes out in the blue colored bars indicate the share of completers out of all community college students who transfer to 4-year institutions by year 6. So you can see that the completion rate improves from 67.1% for the 2014 cohort to 69.2% for the 2016 cohort, which is up about 2 percentage points. Next, please. And we can see here in this graph that the share of bachelor's degree recipients among completers also increased even during their pandemic impacted 5th and 6th years of enrollment for the 2014, 15, and 16 cohorts. So together, even in the midst of the pandemic, the rate of upward transfer and 6-year bachelor's degree completion rates were largely unaffected, although the actual number of community college students who transferred to 4-year institutions is smaller for the recent cohorts because the overall community college beginning cohorts decreased in size. Next slide, please. So then we come to this most important question of what implications can we draw from all the trends that we have seen so far for community colleges. So from the most recent enrollment trends that we discussed earlier towards the beginning of the presentation, we see that the overall community college enrollment has begun to level off. Then, does that mean that transfer from community college to 4-year institutions will also stabilize? The quick answer is that the leveling of community college enrollment is less likely to lead to a fast recovery in transfer, especially upward transfer numbers. As previously mentioned, the two groups driving the community college enrollment stabilization are freshmen and dual enrollees. So you can see in the chart on your left, the growth of dual enrollees has been particularly large. So those under 18 are considered dual enrolled high school students in the graph. So this suggests that the current enrollment trends we see for community colleges is less likely to translate into growth in upward transfer. But the return of freshmen is definitely encouraging for upward transfer growth down the road. Next slide, please. It is also notable that the skilled trade program enrollment that we sort of saw, that Jeremy briefly discussed at the beginning of the presentation, such as the mechanic and repair technology or construction trades, is growing faster than the more traditional transfer majors such as liberal arts or business. So this sort of suggests that more students are pursuing programs that will provide them with the skill sets that they need and just be done with, rather than pursuing programs that are more traditional gateways to bachelor's degree. So this indicates that it is likely to take more time for upward transfer enrollment to recover. So to recap on some of the major trends that we've seen and the implications, the upward transfer continued its decline in fall 2022, while other transfer pathways actually either stabilized or began to rebound. Especially, we see stabilization in 2-year lateral transfers, which suggests that students might be looking into options for more immediately available or short-term programs rather than taking a path to pursue a baccalaureate. Most recent enrollment trends show overall community college enrollment is beginning to level off, but it is still too early to know if these signs of recovery will soon lead to growth in upward transfer enrollment. And this is because, especially given the community college enrollment growth has been driven by freshmen and dual enrollees, and we also been seeing growth of skilled trade program enrollment that are less likely to translate to immediate growth in upward transfer. When you look at which students were affected the most, upward movement became more difficult, especially for women, older students, and urban and transfer-focused community colleges following the pandemic. So together, these three sort of points based on a snapshot of the latest enrollment trends indicate access to upward transfer is contracting. But even as access to upward transfer is contracting, a more focused look at community college beginning cohorts, students' pathways shows improvement in the 6-year baccalaureate degree attainment rates, despite the fact that these community college starters went through the pandemic during the 5th and 6th years of enrollment. So certainly this is very encouraging, and it may be the case that the outcomes for the more recent cohorts who experienced pandemic during the earlier years of the enrollment also show improvement, although the overall size of community college beginning cohorts had declined. So with more data and time, we will get to see a more complete picture of the full pandemic impact and pathways to recovery among community colleges and students. So now I would like to shift gears and spend a little time to present and walk you through our data dashboard for the transfer and progress report. So you can visit our website for the transfer and progress report to access the full PDF report, download the appendix, or explore the data dashboard. The data dashboard provides the most up-to-date information on transfer enrollment trends, and this aggregates transfer enrollment by community college type, major and state, demographic background, student income background, as well as the progress and success of community college entering cohorts. Given there is a lot of information presented in the dashboard, we have some guiding questions. If you can switch to the next slide, please. So these are some guiding questions we can sort of see to sort of understand what kind of questions can be addressed by looking at and navigating our dashboard. So some example questions are, for instance, through the dashboard, you can get information on how did 6-year completion rates differ by race and ethnicity for upward transfer students for the 14, 15, and 16 community college beginning cohorts. Is the share of in versus out-of-state transfer students in my state different now than it was before the pandemic? Outside of students enrolled in broad liberal arts programs, are upper transfer students more likely to change their major after transferring than those students who transferred between community colleges? So given the time, I think we can sort of walk through together one of the guiding questions. We can go to, I can showcase how we can use the website to address the first guiding questions. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is the transfer and progress report landing page when you get to our website. And as I indicated earlier, you can access the full report here, the PDF version, as well as the data appendix. When you scroll down further, you can actually see the dashboard and navigate to different tabs to get the information that you want. So for the first question, where it's asking how the 6-year completion rates differ by race and ethnicity for upward transfer students in the fall 2014, 15, and 16 community college entering cohorts, you can find that information in our progress of community college entering cohort tabs. So if you click and go to the tab, you see all of our results and analysis based on our cohort study. And from here, when you scroll down to figure 29, it presents information about the cumulative outcome as a share of community college entering cohorts. On your right, there are multiple filters that you can use to sort of be more selective on what information you may be looking for. So here we want to know specifically for upward transfer completion rates. So here for the transfer pathway, you can click upward transfer to look at just the upward transfer students. And then to get a sense of what the completion rates looks like across different race and ethnicity groups, you can select at the race and ethnicity filter the particular race groups you might be interested in. So here for white students, you see for the 2014 cohort, the completion rate was 71.5% for the 2014 cohort. And for 2016 cohort, it went up to 73.3%, so about 2 percentage point increase. When you click on the Latinx group, you see that it went from 68.2% to a completion rate of 70.1%. So about a similar 2 percentage point increase. So we can go to Asian students to do another comparison. For Asian students, the completion rate went from 73% to 75.1%. So again, about 2 percentage point increase. When you go to the Black student group, you see that it goes from 47.1% for 2014 cohort to 51.2%. For the 2016 cohort. So for Black students, it actually went up about 4 percentage points. So by doing this rough comparisons across different student groups, you can see that the Black students increased the most in terms of the completion rate between the 2014 cohort and the 2016 cohort. So similarly for the other guiding questions, you can get information regarding the in-state and out-of-state share broken out by different states here in this figure, as well as for the third guiding question, you can also see the change of major across different transfer pathways that are presented here. So I would like to stop there to leave some time for any Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Hee-sun. That was really helpful. I appreciate being able to walk through these tools. I know there's so much really great data in there that people can explore. So we'll be sending out some of these guiding questions as well to everyone so you can use them to help you explore the tool as well. I just wanted to pose a couple questions to you. I want to thank Sarah from your team who's been great at answering questions as we go along. We did have one question here about students who might be pursuing a baccalaureate degree at a community college. So Jeremy, I'm going to pose this one to you. How do you account for community college students who stay at their community college to get a baccalaureate degree, and for students who transfer maybe from one community college to another community college that also offers a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, that's a great question. Throughout most of the report, we're very aware of the community college baccalaureate offerings. Throughout most of the report do include what we call primarily associate degree granting baccalaureate institutions, along with your traditional public 2-year schools. I can't remember, Hee-sun, the cohort analysis may have information on overall baccalaureate completion, which you might be able to compare fruitfully. But what I would say to that is it is a phenomenon. It's a relatively, at this time, small phenomenon of the total number of baccalaureate degrees awarded to people who start in community colleges. But it is definitely something that we we'll think about teasing out more in future reports as this becomes a larger phenomenon. And I'll think about whether there are ways to tease that out. There's no direct information that I'm aware of. I don't know, Hee-sun wants to step in on that. I just noticed a lot of questions, people wanting to know how much of this is affected by the community college cohort shrinking. And obviously, when the community college cohort shrinks, there will be fewer students who show up down the line as upward transfer students. I think what we're seeing, though, is that the declines in upward transfer students tend to be larger than the declines in the overall community college enrollment shrinkage. So when I showed the chart about between 2020 and 2022, the upward transfer declining 7.5% each year, the total community college enrollment over that period in these data declined 7.5% in total over that 2-year period, rather than 7.5% each year, if that makes sense. So we are seeing a contraction that seems to be larger than the overall enrollment decline at community colleges.
I think one other question I want to pose to you, Hisan, I'll put this one to you. It's about how you're defining transfer students. And so the question is, would you say that a student who took dual enrollment classes at a community college and then went to a 4-year school is a transfer student, since they started out at a, taking these courses at a community college? But maybe you could just clarify the definition for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that we are defining transfer students here is we define students as transfer students if they previously were enrolled at a Title IV degree granting institutions and subsequently enrolled at another Title IV degree granting institutions. And it is also important to note that we only are considering the change of institutions of students are enrolled in, regardless of whether any academic credits were recognized between the institutions.
I would also just add to that this does not include dual enrolled high school students. Mm-hmm. So they would not be included as transfer students unless they were enrolled at a Title IV degree granting institution
exactly
after having completed high school.
All right, looks like one final question popped up in the chat. The question is, to what degree could test optional policies at 4-year institutions have contributed to the decline in upward transfer? So if a student would have gone to a community college, instead went straight to a 4-year school, now able to go straight to the 4-year school, do you think that's having any impact?
That's a great question. I mean, it could be, but based on the data that we collect, we are not able to give an answer to the question. We can only speculate.
Yes, I'm seeing this question also about students who completed an associate's degree in high school. That's an interesting question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I believe well, I don't know. I'd have to think about how they would show up in our data. It might depend on where they first enrolled, whether that was at a community college or a 4-year school. Yeah.
Seems that some of these are really great questions that some IR folks in community colleges might want to look at with their own institutional data and dig into some of these questions that sometimes we're not able to answer with national data.
And it's always good for us to hear what other disaggregations and sort of new pathways that we can include into our analyses going forward.
Great. Well, I think that covers all of the questions that we've received. I want to thank everyone for being here and for submitting your questions. And I really want to thank Jeremy and Hisan for their presentation today. I want to thank Sarah again for answering all these questions in the chat, and Megan Anderson on our team at CCRC for doing a lot of the organizational and behind the scenes stuff on this webinar. Jeremy, if you could just pull up the slides again really quickly. We have just 2 closing slides here.
Sorry, did we get this question about the lowest income and underserved student groups leaving community colleges, making this pool smaller?
Oh, yes. Would you like to take that one before we go?
I mean, I think, that's quite, a distinct possibility. We, as Tom mentioned, we know that the pandemic has not affected all groups at community colleges equally. And so I think that's certainly a valid hypothesis for what could be partially driving what we're seeing in the trends. But with that, I will pull up the slides so that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Sorry I missed that one. All right. Well, so while Jeremy is pulling this up, I just want to thank everyone again for being here and encourage you to check out the ARC website. Megan put it in the chat earlier. I also want to thank our funder, the Institute of Education Sciences, and our partner organizations, the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, and the UC Davis Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research, who are leading the ARC network alongside CCRC. So the recording slides from this webinar today, they will be sent out and they'll be made available on the ARC network website. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just stay tuned for more publications from the ARC network. Megan is going to put in the chat the link to a new brief that looked at pandemic relief spending, and there's going to be more coming on that soon. The Clearinghouse is also releasing several new publications in the next couple of months, so I would stay tuned for those. And as always, please sign up for the CCRC newsletter, sign up for the Clearinghouse newsletter, or for the ARC network newsletter, and that way you will be able to get notifications when we release new publications and when we have more webinars, which we're going to be having many of over the next couple of years as the network leads, as well as the research teams that are participating in the ARC network are releasing findings from their studies. So thank you all for being here today. And thank you all for your questions. Please feel free to check out our website and be in touch if you have any further questions. Have a great day, everyone.